Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Gold Silver Bitcoin Show, brought to you by the GoldSilverBitcoin.com store. We are more than honored to be sitting down today with Lobo Tiggre of IndependentSpeculator.com. Thank you so much, Mr. Tiggre, for joining me today.
Well, thank you very much. And I thought you were going to introduce me as Darth Silver. What's up?
That's the first question. So here we are. Now, okay, so you have a thesis that, and I've heard this thesis from one other person who I think was at the Stock Pulse's Silver Symposium, and I think that they certainly understood your point of view. And I guess it really, for the listeners, centers around this concept of the demonetization of silver. And if silver has been demonetized, that leaves the only demand being the industrial demand. So we'll leave that thesis there, and you can correct that if that's the wrong thesis. Where I want to take this is that essentially we had a set of economic measures taken by federal governments last year, including shutting down small businesses, which I believe, especially in the US, to be the driver of economic growth, real economic growth. And we've seen the repercussions thereof in the form of pictures of there not being enough ice cream, for instance, at the grocery stores, et cetera. And now, if this trend continues and we are heading towards a situation like we saw in the 70s during that economic crisis period, then will silver even get a bid on the industrial side? So first of all, I guess we could start where you maybe want to recount how you got the name Darth Silver, and then we can kind of dig into if the economy slows, where does that leave silver?
Sure. And I like that you're framing it that way. We can talk theory and possibilities, but where the rubber really hits the road is, so what? How do we invest? What does it do for me? Why does this even matter? Why are we talking about this? Let me frame it in a couple of ways. One is, I'm writing about, and I'm thinking and acting based on the data. This isn't just some theoretical thesis I have about the nature of money and what may or may not happen with demonetization of silver. What really got my attention, and probably has your audience's attention, is that on a daily basis, we'll see gold and silver jot in opposite directions, right? Gold be up, silver be down. And that's not normal. That's not how monetary metals should be behaving. The gold-silver ratio can expand or contract. But for decades, since the end of the gold standard, gold and silver have moved together, less or more degree, but together. And we're seeing that very much different over the last year or two. So just to put some quick numbers on this, the overall correlation from the last 50 years on this between silver and gold prices is above 0.9. I mean, that's about as high a correlation as you can get in the real world with things that are different, right? It's almost one. It's almost a one-to-one relationship. So that's the context, and that makes sense. They're both monetary metals. But the relationship has begun to change. Over the last 5 years, I've just run these numbers again recently. Over the last 5 years, that's down to 0.85. Over the last 2 years, it's down to 0.75. Over the last year, it's down to 0.4. That's actually up significantly from the last time I did this. I think we had a bit of a fluke with the kerfuffles after the crash of 2020. It was down to 0.2 the last time I did this. So silver bugs rejoice. The correlation with the gold price, if that's important to you, is back up to 0.4. But that's still very low. That's less than half the historic relationship. So the point number one is that what I'm talking about is a visible change in the marketplace. You know it, I know it, we're seeing it, and the numbers back this up. There is a change there, and it's dangerous to ignore that change. So that's the context, Justin. Now, that's how I got to be called Darth Silver, because when I wrote about this, you can't just dismiss anybody that says something you don't like. That's really dangerous for any investor. If you become so wedded to a thesis that you're impervious to facts, you open yourself up to massive losses. And yes, I know that silver is the word for money in many languages. And yes, I know that silver has been used for money for thousands of years. I agree with all that. I'm not denying any of that. But if I say, hey, something's changing, and you say, no, I don't want to hear that, you're really putting yourself at risk. And so what I said is, because they say this, it doesn't mean I'm in league with the devil or Darth Vader. And the folks at Wall Street Silver said, Darth Silver. And that's how I got the name. But to their credit, those guys have been very friendly and open to an intelligent dialogue on this subject, which I greatly appreciate. So where this leaves us now and how do we deal with this going forward? What this is telling us, I think, is that you can't ignore the industrial side, which is what you just asked about, that you can't just look at silver as purely a monetary metal. And the good news is that silver is a key industrial mineral now. It is absolutely essential to the new energy paradigm, the whole green agenda. And many silver bugs don't agree with the green agenda. We don't think governments should be pushing this, mandating that, incenting that. They should stay out of this marketplace. I agree with that. I'm a libertarian. I believe in separation of economy and state for the same reasons we have separation of church and state. But it doesn't matter what I believe. Uncle Sam isn't asking me. He's not probably asking either you or our audience either. We're the lunatic fringe. They don't care what we think. So it's happening, right? This is another one of those things, whether we like it or not, doesn't matter. It's happening and we're the minority. So we deal with that as investors. I mean, as persons who vote, certainly we can and should take action. I'm not saying to just, roll over and take whatever the powers that be shoved down our throats. I'm saying that as an investor, I'm dealing with the facts before me. And the facts before me indicate a greater industrial role for silver. And whether we like it or not, the whole ESG trend is actually very bullish for silver. So I think this is actually good news. In the near term, however, if the wheels come off the economy, if there's a big crash, if the Fed tightens and panics everybody in the marketplace, there's a big crash, of course, everything gets whacked. And as we saw in the crash of 2020, silver gets whacked harder than gold, and it doesn't come back. That's almost me making a prediction there. I would expect that if we get a big market crash, silver would fall harder, and it would do one of those I'm falling and I can't get up tricks for a while because of its industrial side. Now, 27 different ways we can go from here. Justin, what do you want to talk about?
Let's stay as kind of honed in on this, on silver as much as possible. So I've never seen silver as an investment. It was always a savings vehicle, if anything, with the lowest expectation that it would track inflation. And perhaps we would get some of the predictions I've been hearing since 2008, $200, $400, $1,200. I mean, I'm sure there was a $5,000 prediction somewhere along the way for silver. And while I certainly have that emotional connection to silver based on my reading of financial history, I certainly never invested in it looking to get rich. Does silver still have a use case in terms of being a savings vehicle to track inflation?
Well, whether it tracks inflation or not, it is value. It is physical value. In that sense, it's identical to gold. It is a financial long for which there is no short. And whatever the value might be, or I don't think of these as prices. As monetary metals, I think of the gold dollar exchange ratio and the silver dollar exchange ratio. I think the silver dollar exchange ratio is more vulnerable now due to its industrial aspect, but I actually see the industrial aspect as a bullish for now, side to that. So yes, the investment thesis and how to play these markets is a completely different consideration from how do I save. And I don't see, I don't even care about what the inflation rate is going to do or how closely it tracks. It is a long for which there is no short. It is a value that I can hold in my hand. And if push comes to shove, I can exchange that for bread and butter to feed my family. And this isn't just a theory for me. This has literally been the case in my life, where I had a financial meltdown 20 some years ago. And I had a coin collection that I had started as a kid. And it was mostly silver because that's phrase out, you search for it on my website. But the quick version is that I bought these old silver pesos. They were really cheap because they weren't real silver. They just had a smidgen of silver in them, like phony American coins, right? And they had a bit of silver, and I had been collecting them for many years as a kid. And then decades later, I ran into this horrific financial train wreck in my personal life. I had nothing else, but I was able to liquidate that coin collection. And after decades of zeros being cut off, the Mexican peso, all this inflation, a pawn shop gave me 1 peso for each one of those old silver pesos because of the smidgen of silver in them. So I have lived this in my life where bullion has literally saved my posterior and fed my family. That's how I see gold and silver, and I see them identically. Now, the issue here that often gets me, the dark silver mantle gets me in trouble with silver bugs, is that they are identical as money, as savings. So why prefer one or the other? Okay, silver is cheaper, but you know what? You can own fractional amounts of gold. And you know what? Gold doesn't tarnish. You can pack a lot more value in a smaller space. You can literally carry $1 million in a briefcase in gold right now, a very strong briefcase. But you can't do that with silver, and it does tarnish. It requires more care. So I think it's a little bit religious. I'm going to get offensive here, so people get mad at me, but I think it's a little bit religious to decide that silver is somehow better than gold as bullion. I don't think so. I think they're interchangeable, and because of gold's greater convenience, it makes sense to save more in gold. And yeah, it's cool to be able to go on YouTube and social media and post your big stacks of silver. Your stack of gold would look much smaller, but that's not why we own the stuff. We're not owning it to show it off or to see how big our stack is. We're owning it to save us if necessary when all else fails. That's the ball to keep your eye on. And so this preference for the bigger stack of silver, it's like saying, you know what, I'm going to save in fiat currency, but I like $1 bills better than $100 bills. I can look at how big my stack of $1 bills compared to my $100 bills. That's a bit silly. I just, as savings, as bullion, I don't see it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in the comments, somebody can tell me what I'm missing. But as a vehicle for savings, the gold bullion is just more efficient. Now people say, oh, but silver's oversold. It'll catch up with gold. There's more upside in this. Well, then you're talking as an investor now. That's not savings. That's not bullion to have in case of emergency. As a person who wants to be assured, no matter what happens, I'm not looking at the prices or the exchange ratios with other currencies or other assets. I'm looking at physical savings, and gold's more efficient for that. If I haven't completely pissed off and alienated your audience, we can go forward.
No, this is it. We're ending it here. Why has gold not been demonetized while silver has been? Or has gold been demonetized in your view?
Actually, this is a good opportunity to back up a little bit. I would not say that silver has been entirely demonetized. The powers that be have done so. And central banks don't hoard silver anymore the way they did. And part of, in previous decades, the problem, the headwind facing silver on top of everything else was central bank dishoarding. Even after they didn't put it in coins anymore, that was an experiment at the time. They didn't know how well that would go. There was a chance that the public would balk, or that for some reason, they're cautious. They kept a lot of silver on hand in case they ever needed to put it back into circulation for a long time. And then when that really never happened, then they started dishoarding, and that government dishoarding of silver was a big headwind on top of other market dynamics for silver, which is why so many silver bugs have suffered so long. It was so far below any reasonable price for so long. This is part of why. And then its whole byproduct on the industrial side issue too. So the powers that be have done everything they can to demonetize it. But you know what? And here I may lose my Darth Silver mantle. It's still considered money by the people in most of the world. So when you see places where the money breaks down, like in Venezuela recently, you saw silver and gold remonetized. There's a lot of gold in Venezuela, so it's easier for them to remonetize gold. And there were stores that they'd have little scales, right? You could go in and buy diapers and food with little flecks of gold from your gold panning in the river and that sort of thing. And that happened not in history or Weimar Republic. That happened last year. It might still be happening now, as far as I know, in Venezuela, where they just completely blew up the currency. In places like this, of course, silver coinage still works. And if you had your stack, you could still use it. So despite the Darth mantle, I'm not anti-silver. I just think it behooves silver investors to look at the facts, don't ignore them, and recognize that the industrial side is a huge swing variable that's going to push silver above and below where you think it should be as a monetary metal. Now, why hasn't gold been equally demonetized? I think, it's funny. You talk about investor psychology, central bank psychology. This is one of those things where I might sound like the lunatic French, but I think the evidence supports the conclusion that these jerks, they're lying. And they know they're lying. They're lying through their teeth, and they know it. Everybody knows it. And look what they do, not what they say. I think they're all concerned somewhere in their deep little twisted black souls that the whole paper money fiasco that they've engineered over the last decades could be about to blow up in their faces. And they want to have something physical, real, that could remonetize whatever they come up with next in their storehouses. And that's why central banks, you know, there used to be an agreement, the central bank gold agreement, not to sell more than 500 tons a year or something. Who cares about that agreement? They're net buyers and have been for a long time now, right? Because I think they see the writing on the wall. And so why hasn't gold been demonetized? Officially, it has. But the reality tells us, and the Basel III determination giving gold tier 1 status, and notice it's not silver, it's just gold, tells you that the powers that be, the liars in chief, they do have some sense of reality that they won't admit to. And that shows in what they do, not what they say.
I was speaking to a Canadian Bitcoiner, and he mentioned that Canada had actually sold all of its gold. Were you aware of that?
I was. It was quite the joke at the time. Other central banks were buying in Canada. People were like, oh, well, is it because they produce so much gold? No, the central bank doesn't look at that. I think, you know, maybe they drank the Kool-Aid and believed it a little too much. They didn't get the memo. Honestly, I don't know the answer to that, Justin. Like, why did Canada make that really bizarre move? Maybe they got the short stick in the raffle, like all the central bankers had a meeting and said, oh, somebody ought to do this, and let's see what the market does. You know, maybe gold prices will tank and we'll all be able to buy more at cheaper prices. And so Canada got the short straw, and they had to go sell their gold, no matter how idiotic and stupid it made them look. And nothing happened, right? It didn't blow up the market. Oh, darn. I don't know. I'm making that up. That's pure conjecture on my part. Don't take that as any kind of, you know, gospel from Darth Silver. But it is funny.
Over the last 10
years.
years.
One more quick thing on that.
Yeah, please.
It's not just Canada, and it's not so entirely, but remember the Bank of England also liquidated a large portion of its gold holdings before at a cyclical low in gold prices. And it was Mr. Brown was the guy in charge at the time. So this is now known amongst gold investors as the brown bottom, where the Central Bank of England got out at the worst possible time.
So I suppose if any central banks sell gold anytime, it's a good indicator to jump on into that market.
Well, I'd love to say that they're a contrarian indicator, but central banks have been buying over the last 10 years plus, and gold's been going up. So can't really make that one stick, but it would be fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in 2015, gold was around $1,100. It had, I think, kind of trended down towards. So now remonetizing silver, I think something that's been interesting watching the Bitcoin phenomenon unfold is the narrative and story that they tell about Bitcoin. And they tell it in the context of central banks, of printing of money, of debt, and that Bitcoin is an alternative for the people. Now, you mentioned that the people still consider silver a money, yet when you hear silver talked about at the conferences or on the programs, it's silver as an investment, silver as an investment, silver as an investment. And while the Bitcoin narrative has stuck, and I think we've seen a lot of would-be silver demand and attention go towards Bitcoin, I'm a prime example of that. Silver, I think where they missed out was by failing to tell a narrative of silver as money, of silver perhaps being able to be remonetized and used in our communities. And that's really what Bitcoin, one of the main talking points of Bitcoin was that retailers should be using and accepting Bitcoin online. It's the internet, it's the money of the internet. While that use case has not panned out so much due to some of the heretofore shortcomings of Bitcoin, there are some solutions being worked on, like Lightning Network for Bitcoin, which might make it viable as the money of the internet. That has not played out yet. That was the narrative that was told, was that people can use gold, or rather Bitcoin, online in payments. Yet silver bugs were never talking about how your mom and pop shop ought to be giving discounts for accepting silver or otherwise. So I suppose, isn't it up to the people to remonetize silver? And wouldn't that behoove those who are trying to spread the gospel of silver?
Well, never say never, Justin. This has actually happened. Bernard von Nothaus of Norfed, he tried, and he actually was able to get people to take some of his silver tokens, because they could tell. Some people could tell that was silver. Okay, so he tried, and they put him in jail. Right, and this has happened several times. So maybe once bitten, twice shy. But as far as, why didn't the Bitcoin guys take on silver as well as gold? Well, remember, silver was more demonetized, if you will, than gold for a long time. And the central banks don't see silver as money anymore. I think they do see gold as money, as a competition to their fiat currencies, even if they won't admit it. But they do. I don't think they see the silver as that way at all. And so from the mainstream perspective, and if you're a young tech guy that you just got into, you understood the concept of what Bitcoin or something like that could do, and you'd see it as competition to money, then you'd obviously look to fiat money and maybe gold. Silver would be farther off the radar. So I'm not surprised that silver got overlooked in this regard. And frankly, I think the whole conflict is a mistake. I think I'm not anti-Bitcoin at all, actually. I have a real hard time putting a value on it, saying what its exchange ratio with the dollar should be. That's very tough for me. But the concept, I love it. It's a private sector response to government mismanagement of the money supply. I think that's fantastic. More power to them. Whatever the money of the future will be, I think the market should determine it. Certainly not governments. It shouldn't be gold bugs or silver bugs. It shouldn't be what we think it should be. It should be what the market determines. And honestly, I see a place for gold, maybe silver, and cryptos in the future in this space as the market further responds to government mismanagement of money, which is happening on steroids now since the COVID-19 situation. But for the Bitcoin guys to take on gold as an enemy, I think it was a mistake. It was a tactical error. Fiat currency is the enemy. And gold and Bitcoin, they could have worked together. Those two crowds could have maybe done more to educate the populace and get more people aware of the dangers of fiat currencies if they'd worked together. And instead, a lot of energy has been spent on hate back and forth between these groups. I think it's really unfortunate because it's like two little dogs fighting together when the big dog comes along and steals the bone. The big dog being the governments and their stupid fiat currencies. Stupid fiat currencies. That's sort of redundant. But anyway, you see what I'm saying? I think it would be better for everybody if these guys would bury the hatchet and go after the real problem, which is government debasement of their funny money. Now, how does silver fit into all this? And here's where the Darth Silver mantle may come back on my shoulders again, is that I've written that if the government fiat currencies really blow up, like all the money printing, all the crazy stuff that comes down now, and the whole experiment blows up, and the markets decide, we don't trust the governments anymore, I could see, whether the governments accept it or not, a de facto gold standard. I could see gold-backed cryptos solving the problem of needing to transport gold in fractional amounts and so on. And I could see gold going back into circulation, if not physically, but if not, then tokenized as money, as an international payment system, as it was throughout all of history until 50 odd years ago. So how does silver fit into that? Now, silver used to be, they call it the poor man's gold. I think that's derogative. It's not necessary. It simply, was more common than gold. And therefore, silver made sense for making change for gold. Gold coins were so much value, so expensive, even in ancient times, that it made sense to have silver coins and even copper coins to make change. That gold and silver were money. That's how it worked. But now, if you can own, 1/100,000th of a gram of gold via an infinitely divisible crypto, why do you need silver to make change? If you're gonna, and nobody even wants to carry paper money in their wallet anymore, Justin. Can you imagine going back to being like a medieval person with a gold purse? Nobody's going to want to go walking down the street with a jingling purse full of coins to the Walmart. What if it's dark out in a scary neighborhood? Electronic transfer is so convenient. I mean, people don't even use paper money anymore. We all have cards or our phones or fobs and things now. You can drive through and pay for gas without getting your wallet out. In that kind of world, it's hard to see, clinky gold coins going back into circulation, let alone silver. So if you're doing everything electronically anyway, why do you need silver as well as gold? Now, if I'm saying, but you're saying let the market decide, the market likes them both, fine. I'm fine with that. But I suspect that the reality will be that it's much more complicated if you have a bimetallic standard, pay in silver or gold, or let alone a trimetallic, pennies, copper, put copper back in the mix. because they used to be at a fixed ratio. You had $1, you had nickels and dimes, you had pennies, and the amount of supposed copper, nickel, and silver in these things, it was fixed. You knew how to make change. But now, with the dollar totally disconnected to any real value in the real world, the prices of these things, fluctuate all the time. If you spent 50 cents and you gave a person a gold dollar and they wanted to give you 50 cents in silver, tomorrow that silver might be 51 cents or 49 cents, let alone right? It gets really complicated if you have a bimetallic or a trimetallic standard. All these prices change with respect to each other. And maybe the computers can keep up with that, but your price sticker in the grocery market, how do you price your ham? If the price is going up and down because it's an electronic price tag, that's going to confuse customers. They don't want to see, the digits going up and down and the price of the ham they're buying for Christmas. They want to see, this is the price, I can pay this price. And for that, I think a monometallic standard in the future, if we ever remonetize and completely go back on a gold standard, I can see silver being left behind. And no, that doesn't mean I don't love silver. I'm just saying as a practical matter, I can see this. Now, as a practical matter, this is years down the road, Justin. I don't think gold bugs and silver bugs need to come to blows over which money is better for remonetization here in 2022. We're talking a long time in the future, I think. And actually, I hope, because a world in which we've gone back on a gold standard is a world that's been through the ringer of a horrific economic and I think social chaos in the meantime. So I'm hoping I'm right that this doesn't happen for a long time. But if I am right, if you're stacking more silver, because someday silver coins will go back into circulation, you might be making a mistake. And you know what? If I'm making a mistake and silver and gold do both go back into circulation, I'm sure that if you stack gold now, because it's more efficient, somebody will exchange your gold for silver in the future. There will be money changers. You won't be stuck because you back gold instead of silver, but you would have paid a lot less in maintenance fees and carrying maintenance for your stack if you go with a gold stack instead of a silver stack. Now, mind you, I have more physical silver right now than gold. But as I stack going forward, I'm really not looking to expand my silver stack. I've got plenty. And as a matter of efficiency and savings, I'm looking to stack more gold. That was probably more long an answer than you wanted. If there's anybody left listening, for what it's worth, that's my take. Remember, it's like the $100 bill versus $1 bill. If you think those bills are going to be useful in the future, does it really make sense to prefer stacking $1 bills because the stack looks bigger?
I never get comments. One of my favorite parts of doing this is reading the comments. So with that said, don't forget to leave a comment. I never hear them say, you should have interrupted your guest more. They always say, you do a nice job of not interrupting your guests. So I want to take a step back to something you said before there's a bunch of things you just said that I want to touch on. But first I want to talk about how and why is there no short for silver?
Sorry, say that again. You mean in the future market or what do you mean?
Well, you mentioned that silver is a metal for which there is no
sorry. Yes. Okay, well, that would apply to honestly anything real on which there's no lien. Like if you own a house, there is another interest on the other side of the table being the bank with the mortgage. Now, if you paid off the house completely, there's still taxes, real estate taxes, and there is some interest that could reduce the value of your house. But mostly, if you owned your house full out, then that would be similar. It's something you own that has its own value, and you can't lose it if the trade goes against you. And that's what my mentor, Doug Casey, meant when he popularized this expression about gold in particular being a financial asset on which you could be long, for which there is no short. And by that, he means like if you take out an option on something, there's somebody on the other side of the trade from you. There's a short for your long. For every long, there's a short. And okay, so I own a stock. Let's say I have the actual paper certificate for a stock. You could say, oh, I'm long. But to get any money back from that stock in the future, I have to be able to sell it. So there's still an interest on the other side of the table from me. It's not a pure long. I can't eat that stock. Right? I have to be able to transact in it and exchange it for something else. And prices can go up and down, and there's issues there. So what's meant by a long for which there is no short is that the thing has value in and of itself. Like I can hold that gold or silver coin in my hand. And there's no other interest, there's no counterparty there. It's the thing itself. That's what I meant. And I absolutely do see silver that way. I see copper or anything physical that way. But if silver is less convenient to stack than gold, then imagine copper. I can fill my house with bars of copper and not come to the same amount of value that a small amount of gold would do. So I'm not anti any particular metal. But the gold is just extremely liquid and valued in and of itself. I knew somebody who had a U.S. gold eagle, 1 ounce bullion coin, and they were in, I won't give specifics because I don't want to out anybody, but they were in an Eastern European country, and they ran into financial difficulties, and the pawn shop didn't recognize it, or they claimed they didn't know this as a coin that they were highly familiar with and could give them full value for. And they even weren't sure how real it was. So they drilled a hole through the middle of this coin, sort of ruining it as a bullion, at least as a collectible bullion coin. They drilled a hole through this gold coin to make sure it wasn't, tungsten inside or something like that. And then so after tests and after sort of just damaging the coin in this way, they finally admitted it was an ounce of gold, and they gave the person, with some discount, money for this ounce of gold. So that's what I mean. I mean, yeah, there could be problems. People may not recognize your coin. Who knows what? In an imperfect world, bad things happen. But at the end of the day, an ounce of gold is an ounce of gold, and you can trade it for bread, butter, whatever you need to live. That's the value of the ultimate form of savings that history has shown us for thousands of years. And yes, I do still include silver in that.
And I've gravitated from essentially a silver bug. I'm going to accumulate 80% silver in my savings and 20% gold, because silver is essentially less expensive, and also perhaps therefore had greater potential for percentage gains. To today, whereas I look at this is I'll just have some of all the metals that are possible. That includes gold, silver, platinum, palladium, rhodium became a thing in the middle of last decade, I guess it might have been. It became very popular on the retail level. And I think there's some other metals that are now available to buy in bullion form. I want a little bit of all these things moving forward, based on the assumption that I want to be prepared for anything. What do you think about that?
Well, on the investment side, if you think one or any of these is undervalued relative to the others, a lot of people are platinum bulls now because platinum is historically undervalued compared to gold and palladium, and they see extra upside in platinum. But that's not a savings thesis. That's not putting away bullion for a rainy day, or like the whole drilling story or my story of my financial meltdown and saving feeding my family with bullion savings. That's an investment thesis. Oh, palladium is overvalued, platinum's undervalued. That's a speculative investment thesis. So if you want to play those markets, play those trades, fine. As far as stacking goes, we'll see if you still love me, Justin, but actually I really disagree with that. I think there's a huge risk in taking on any of these other silvery looking metals as a form of savings, because nobody knows what they look like. I mean, I couldn't tell you the difference between platinum and rhodium if I looked at a bar of either one of them. And there are a lot of silvery looking metals out there. And here's the thing, of the really silvery looking metals, silver's the cheapest. Nobody's going to substitute platinum or palladium or rhodium for your silver coin and try to sell you, oh, hey, this is silver. I'm going to trick you. I'm going to sell you some platinum and it's, tell you it's silver. That doesn't happen. So you don't have to worry about your silver not being silver compared to the other silvery metals. I mean, it doesn't look like tin or aluminum or the cheaper ones. You can clearly tell those are not silver. Anybody can see that. So imagine a Mad Max world where you're out there, gold has that unique color. As long as you can drill a hole through it, see that it really is gold through and through, anybody will take your gold because they can see what it is. They can feel the weight. They know what it is. Silver itself is safe because anything else is more expensive. But rhodium, who the heck knows what rhodium looks like? What's the chemical test for rhodium? I'd have to look that up, right? So no, I'm not interested in snagging any of those. I wouldn't own a physical bar of platinum or palladium or rhodium at all, ever. If I was in the auto industry and I might need to make catalytic converters, maybe, but as an investor, no. Well, no, as an investor, if I thought one was oversold and I really thought it was going to change, as an investor speculator, yes. But physically, as bullion for savings, no, I don't see any role for any of those at all. Sorry.
No problem. If I had to look at the metal specifically short term and speculate and guess, I wouldn't necessarily speculate based on these guesses, although I would say they are conjectures. I think they're educated guesses that short term, as you stated, platinum does seem interesting. That's short term speculation thesis. This is not financial advice, although a lot of what I do say on here is financial advice. I'm sorry, lawyers. So short-term platinum does seem a little bit inexpensive compared to where it's been in relation to the other metals historically. And then long-term, my speculation would be silver. And I would say that the investment thesis that I saw 10 years ago, or actually, I guess it's far more now. It's like 12 years ago in 2008, great financial crisis. Still pretty much the fundamentals are there. It has gained, it hasn't gained like Bitcoin has, it hasn't gained like Tesla has. However, I think the thesis is still there. That's my speculation note. Now, Bitcoin versus gold, this Bitcoin versus gold debate.
Actually, sorry, Justin, you did me the favor of not interrupting me, but let me touch on before we move on, because I did point out the price imbalance between platinum and palladium. But I have to say, that doesn't make me a platinum bull. There's a reason for that imbalance. And yes, I do understand that there is some resubstitution going on, that some more platinum is going into catalytic converters because of the price imbalance. But I also understand that palladium is actually better than platinum in many applications. And you can't just put platinum instead of palladium in the converter. It makes a difference where that converter goes in the car. You have to change your production line somewhat. So the resubstitutability here is not as easy as some platinum bulls are making it out to be. And then you have the whole world going away from internal combustion engines anyway. And certainly diesel falling out of favor. So this thesis that platinum is oversold compared to palladium has been in play for a decade. And every year I hear somebody telling me, oh, platinum's way oversold, it's going to go up. And every year it hasn't happened, or not really, not in a real breakout way that paid people off. So sorry, I don't want to wax on too much about that. I just want to say, because I brought it up, that I didn't bring it up because I'm going long platinum. I just brought it up as an example of the kind of thing that one might want to do to speculate on the different metal valuations out there.
And as it relates to the gold versus Bitcoin debate, I think that this is a good example and we can apply it to other areas of life. I suspect I know that it's a very small percentage of the people that are getting involved and emotional over this gold versus Bitcoin thesis. And those that are kind of perpetuating it, I think, are doing their followers an intellectual disservice. Now, I think that what we've seen play out, especially on media, generally, all media, social media, mainstream media, is that we like zoom in on the lunatic fringe of each lunatic fringe. And we think, these people are the examples of everyone else who believe these things. So for instance, in the summer of 2020, during the Black Lives Matter protest, there was a lot of damage done to commercial real estate. And certain people will use that to lambast the entire Black Lives Matter movement. January 6th happened. And there was the destruction of property and even some violence at the Capitol. And certain people will use that to paint a wide picture of the potentially 1 million people that were there. I've heard estimates from like 2,000 to 30,000 to 1 million. I wasn't there. I'm suspecting it was a lot of people. This small percentage, the lunatic fringe of the lunatic fringe, if you will, who are being used to paint a picture of the rest of that community. And then now we have the Bitcoiners and the gold bugs. Very few Bitcoiners are dedicating all that energy to talk poorly about gold. And they see it exactly as you see it, that it's really, these are all options, or perhaps a way in which to diversify a portfolio. So if you are mostly long Bitcoin, it might behoove you to get some Bitcoin. And they are essentially posited or ought to be posited in relation to fiat currency specifically. So my main point is that I think that we like zoom in on the lunatic fringes of these lunatic fringes, and then we all hate each other.
I see that. It's interesting that you bring up these two polar opposites, right? You have the Black Lives Matter group, which is being smeared by the actions of the most vocal, media-worthy minority, right? And that's on the left. And then you've got January 6th, and some people stormed the Capitol, and that makes everybody on the right look like maybe kind of lunatic fringe and crazy. And it's interesting. It's scary. It is, it makes society appear so divided. But I have to say, Justin, I'm not sure, what the ratio is. I don't know how oddball these people are compared to the rest. And it makes me, as a person who's highly critical of the state, I'm an anti-government person, if you will. I'd rather see the government out of just about everything. Does that mean I'm ready to pick up a gun and go to Washington and shoot people? No. But in a context where we can hardly talk, the sides hate each other so much, and there's civil discourse is broken down. How else, what outlet do these people have? I don't know. It scares me, Justin, honestly, with the potential for economic turmoil ahead. It scares me a lot, because it's one thing if there's these intellectual opposites and they battle it out in the universities, or there's a few protests here and there. But when the odoriferous effluvia hits the oscillator of the wind, shit hits the fan, right? Bad stuff happens. When people are hungry and people are upset, people are worried, then they do get out in the streets in greater numbers. And if a minority that's extreme jumps in front of the parade and starts leading, and it gets motion, and there's this group think, this crowd think, this herd mentality, a lot of people can get swept up in emotion and not even realize what they're doing. I mean, they may not personally be violent, but if they find themselves in a protest that turns violent, who knows what happens? Right? That guy's trying to hit me. Well, I'm going to hit him back. It's really scary. I was just a kid during the Watts riots and stuff back then. I've never seen an America divided like this, not personally, that I can watch it and see it happening in real time. And I find it really alarming in the face of economic difficulties ahead. I think these differences will come out more. I don't think they're going away, Justin. And that's very worrisome. I don't know what is that, but it is. I think it's serious. I think it's real. I think it's something we're going to be dealing with in the years ahead.
You mentioned that you see the economic turmoil, and you used the word earlier, social chaos. What do you mean by that?
Well, I don't want to be like one of these prophets of doom that talks about the end of the world every year. It's kind of embarrassing. I hate being wrong. But the card is in the deck. If the powers that be lose control, I mean, just think about when the Soviet Union collapsed. For decades, many of us who were critical of that command and control economy said, this can't last. It doesn't work. The commissars can't know how many nails the entire Soviet Union should produce, or tractors, or whatever. The market price system is necessary. But you know what? We were wrong year after year. I mean, anybody who said, oh, it's going to fall apart this year, or this is the year, fine, wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong for so many years. And there have been people saying that the fiat currency system is due for a collapse for year after year after year. So I really don't want to join that crowd. But you know what? When it does start coming apart, it could have come apart with astonishing speed. And one of the key factors, I think, to watch out for, like when it's really starting to happen here, is it's well understood. I mean, there's no real numbers out there that I can put my claws on. But it's well understood that for all the dollars in circulation in the United States, there's some multiple of that in circulation outside the United States, like on the order of a magnitude outside the United States. So as long as the powers that be can convince everybody everything's fine, the dollar's fine, or okay, it might lose a little bit, but nothing big to worry about. These are not the droids you're looking for. Keep moving along, right? then everything, we could see high inflation, we could see turmoil, but nothing really blows up. But if at some point all these foreign holders of dollars decide, you know what, that doesn't look good, maybe it's time to get out of the dollar, and all those dollars outside the United States come raining back in on the US, you could see high inflation turn into out of control inflation like that. And that could spark a panic, which could lead to a hyperinflation, like Venezuela style hyperinflation. Now that sounds like a wild and crazy prediction. It's not a prediction. I'm saying it's a possibility. The trigger to watch for is the dollar and the foreign exchange markets. If that really starts just, breaking records, losing it big time, that is extremely dangerous for the entire global financial order right now. And if that breaks down, in 2008, it was said that we came within 48 hours of checks not clearing the banks. What would happen? What would happen to the day-to-day person if you couldn't do that? You couldn't go to the store and use your debit card to pay for your groceries. I mean, the panic and the chaos ensuing, I think it would be truly historic. And I don't know when that happens. I'm saying it can happen. The cards are certainly, it's funny. I talk about these, cards of the deck, these metaphors. I'm actually not a gambler. My friend Doug Casey loves to play poker. I play with him. That's the only time. But the metaphor is good, right? We don't know when these cards turn up, but the cards are in the deck, Justin. I think we could, in the next couple of years, see the social glue completely come apart if the powers that be lose control of this house of cards they've built. I don't know that will or will not happen, but it's a possibility that I think nobody should be unprepared for. And back to gold and silver bullion, that's why I own these things. I don't want to have to dip into them next week. That time I did, it was in 1999. I haven't done that sort of liquidation for 23 years. And I hope I never have to do it. I hope to be able to pass on my bullion to my inheritors in the future. But if something like you are asking about actually happens, if the global system comes apart and there's some huge, literally chaos in the streets situation, then I think we'll be happy. We don't need to argue about whether silver is better than gold to stack. We'll be glad to have both.
Your financial train wreck in 1999. I think a lot of the viewers have probably been through situations like that, whether it was while they were young and had not yet had a chance to amass anything, or even later when they had built something up and then lost it. Can you speak to surviving that? And what was it like? And how hard was it emotionally?
Oh. Justin, I don't know that anybody can put into words what it's like to look at your children and think, I may not be able to feed my children tomorrow. I mean, I suppose anybody who's had a child, turn up with cancer or something horrible like that maybe has a worse experience. I don't know, but it's awful. It's the sort of thing that, even if the chances are 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million, it's not something you want to ever happen. So if the insurance is minimal, and in my view, putting a little bit of money away in gold and silver bullion, what's the worst that can happen? The price goes down and I need to sell some and I take a bit of a loss. At least I can still sell some, right? The chances of gold going to zero, I think, are zero. So the risk is very small compared to the potential benefit in case of some really crushing need like this. But actually, I think a lot of people outside the United States and maybe Western Europe have seen very little of this. People outside have seen situations like this. Obviously, people in Latin America, very used to high inflation rates and hardening their assets. People in Eastern Europe, Russia, they've seen hyperinflations and high inflations. But Western Europe, the United States, I think entire generations have grown up without any real understanding of what high inflation means. Just look at it now. We've got 7% inflation in the US, and people are more blasé about it than they were when Gerald Ford was putting price controls in the last hyperinflation. People, they still don't get it. Well, partly they may be drinking the transitory Kool-Aid. They may believe that, it's all supply chain issues and it's just going to go away. Um, but yeah, 7% inflation destroys savings at a phenomenal rate. Remember, it compounds. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but that destroys your savings in just a few years. Half your savings are gone at a 7% inflation rate. You know, that's huge. And so I don't think people get it. I think most people do not understand what they are looking in the face of right now, Justin. And, you know, I don't want to predict instant fireworks, but the odds right now look like more than 7% in the next inflation print. And then we get another one before the Fed meets in March. You know, if it keeps going up, you know, the Fed may be forced to do things that would greatly destabilize markets. So, you know, many ways we could go here, but I assume your audience has already got a stack, and I'm not saying everybody, you know, go out and hawk the farm and buy more. But if there's anybody that's underexposed, it doesn't feel like they have enough of a stack to deal with financial turmoil for at least, say, 6 months minimum, but a year. I would like to have a year's year's living expenses socked away in physical bullion, that financial long for which there is no short. I think that is a prudent thing to do, and especially in current circumstances.
How did you overcome the financial train wreck you experienced? Was there a moment of particular resolve when you were like, I'm never letting this happen again, and here are the steps I'm going to take to make sure it doesn't?
Those are somewhat separate. The immediate, well, I liquidated my coin collection and I fed my family, and that bought me time to literally put together a business plan overnight, market it to a bunch of friends, and raise money for a new business venture. So like, that's faster than printing up a new resume and trying to get a job, in my view. I was solvent again within a week. You know, it helps to have friends who believe in you, who think, you know, either you're a smart cookie or you'll do what you say you'll do. So, you know, character matters here. I don't know any old. I even back then as a libertarian, I had something of I wouldn't call it a following, but I was known. I had written a book. So you know, that made, you know, I don't know if Joe Shoeshine boy could go out and write a business plan and raise a bunch of money overnight. But actually, I don't discount yourself. Most people have friends and family. Somebody's got a rich uncle somewhere. And if you could put, you know, think of any need that needs satisfying, there's a business plan there somewhere. So that was my immediate solution was, you know, I planned it. The details are more, but I had a plan. It fell apart, and I instantly put together another plan. As far as how it changed my outlook and how, you know, it certainly, I was already a gold bug, if you will. And the story for that is actually that as a child in Mexico, when I started this coin collection, that was when I first became aware of high inflation. And I was making money with odd jobs, chores, sort of dumpster diving and garage sales, sort of pre-eBay entrepreneurship, if you will, as a kid. I was making money, and I was very proud of all these pesos I'd earned. And it was my mother actually who said, well, what are you going to do with pesos? I said, well, I'll save them and grow my business. And she said, well, what about inflation? I said, what? You know, I was just a kid, right? And so she explained to me what inflation was. And it was like the floor fell out of under me. I was aghast. Like, the governments are doing what? And this is doing, it was like a thief reaching into my wallet and taking my hard-earned money out of my wallet when I understood what was happening. And I said, well, what do people do? And she says, oh, well, they buy dollars because they don't inflate as much. Oh, dollars. Oh, great. And so I immediately started changing all my pesos for dollars. That was my portfolio hardening. And this was in the late 70s. And I came back to the United States after we lived in Mexico for some years. We came back to the United States in 1979. And, you know, what was inflation doing then in the United States? What was gold and silver doing then? And so the aha moment was, holy cow, it's not just the peso, it's the dollar too. It's just as bad. It's just another piece of paper. And the guys in government, they're lying here too. And they're reaching into my wallet here too. So I became a gold bug and silver bug in the late 70s based on that experience. So the financial meltdown in 99 didn't really change my outlook. It told me I was right. It was like, thank goodness that I am a gold bug, right? I saved my family by being the way I am. And so it just redoubled resolve, Justin, to make sure this never happened again, to increase my stacks, to invest accordingly. And honestly, the investment part took a lot longer to get into. I still had sort of the slave wage mentality. That was a whole nother conversation, a whole nother awakening of what Kiyosaki calls getting out of the rat race, right? The idea of putting your money to work for you instead of you working for money took me a little bit longer to catch on to. But when that did, that sure made a difference and changed my life.
We've had the honor and privilege of sitting down today with Lobo Tiggre of independentspeculator.com. Thank you so much, Lobo, for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Justin. It's not like the usual questions I get, so I did enjoy this. And I hope the audience finds it valuable.
So do I. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Have a great day.